moral?
Well, I think there's not much consensus on the question.
No, there's not much consensus. Everything is dependent upon the individuals involved and whose side you're on and those kinds of things. So you see civil unrest, and it's incredible. You see civil unrest in one place and another, and people start looking at who is involved in the civil unrest, and all of a sudden their words change. You see vastly different attitudes. I will give you an instance. One of the reasons why there was such powerful riots in New York and Seattle is because of the use of social media. And most of those platforms have not shut down people if they're part of Antifa or Black Lives Matter or those things. In other words, they at least won't acknowledge the hypocrisy of handling things in different ways. Now, why should that matter to us? It's this: we need to recognize that as Christians, we certainly have a minority voice, but if we don't speak, where is our voice? Did Jesus tell us to speak? To speak in the right ways? I'm not saying that we need to have the Christian party. I want both parties. If we're going to have a two-party system, I want both parties to be Christian. I've been in places that I've had both the local leader of the Democratic Party and the local leader of the Republican Party in the same church, and they could be civil with one another. Never once to my knowledge, at least not in church when I was there, did they pull a gun on each other. They actually could care and love one another, and that's what political opponents should do in a republic like ours. But if Christians are silent, the forces of Satan will not be. So I'm not suggesting you get more partisan. In fact, I would suggest that's probably, as the church, we don't need to get partisan, but we need to speak clearly about the truth of Jesus Christ in season or out of season. And that voice is necessary. Moving on. I'm doing everything I can not to get to this passage, but you know what? I'm going to do it. So 26. And I find more bitter than death the woman who is a trap. Her heart is a net and her hands chained. The one who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner will be captured by her. Look, says the teacher, I have discovered this by adding one thing to another to find out the explanation, which my soul continually searches for but does not find. I found one person 1,000, but none of those was a woman. There's no way I can make this politically correct, guys. Recognize he is speaking his experience. And if anybody knows about the wiles of a woman, it's the guy who has as many wives and concubines as Solomon. So if Solomon was in a mess, it was a mess of his own making. Here's the point. He says, at best, I've seen people operating under this framework of wisdom, 1 in 1,000, if that. I'm going to dwell on the easy part, right? Isn't that what he's saying? And here's the issue. Obviously, it was a man. But none of them was a woman. Yeah, see, I was trying to wait to get to that, but okay. I'm trying to save my skin as long as possible. It's kind of like as long as the enemy hasn't come into the foxhole, I have a chance. No, I'm not. I'm not saying you are. Here's the thing. Let's dwell on the main thing, then we'll deal with the 800-pound gorilla on the passage, and that's this: the way of wisdom is seldom traveled. Traveled. People find a lot better ways in their minds of traveling than they do the way of wisdom. And he's going very specifically, and let me give you what I think we can glean out of this. I'm not going to try to speak for Solomon, but I think it's important that and this is the thing. If you think about the underlying point, it is that people tend to think. Now, when I was a young man, I thought it was only men. I didn't recognize that it was non-gender specific. But that people tend to think with their hormones. Would you say that our culture thinks with their hormones? That's a genteel way of saying it. Okay. Well, I used to think that, and then 34 years of being a minister has taught me that this is not simply a male thing. I grew up in a house where my mother was the only female. It was all boys and everything else, and and I won't get into other things that explain to me that these things are true. But the reality is, we are so focused on human sexuality in a human perspective that in fact it can drive everything else. In fact, if you hear the dialogue about gender issues, it's all about who people have a desire to sleep with. Not all about, there are other issues, especially with the Q community. But isn't that true? It's all about look. And here's their point. You will find people bringing up God who don't believe in Him when it comes to this. God wouldn't have made you that way and given you those kinds of feelings. Well, let me tell you about the number of people I know who have been tempted to have extramarital affairs or to have relationships with clearly people who are minors. Now that seems like an even bigger issue, yes? Anybody know where Cambridge, Massachusetts is? There's some sort of little community college there or something, right?
You mean Harvard?
Yeah, Harvard. Harvard. I can't say. I say it like a Texan. So our Massachusetts say it differently, but here it is. So the home of Harvard has said that civil unions cannot be limited to two people anymore. That now it can be multiples, 3 or more. Because we need to redefine what marriage is.
No, we don't.
Well,
God stated.
I am not a proponent. I am voicing what the city of Cambridge has decided. There is a huge movement to allow minors to be able to give consensual sex to adults. Do what? Yeah, but it's being pushed today by many forces, and yet they don't. This is the thing: they don't see the incongruity in if you're going to allow, say, a 16-year-old girl to give consent to a 50-year-old, but then you're going to say, but if it's a workplace and that person is a superior, all of a sudden that's a bad thing. Here's the issue. We don't really have a rationale for what we're doing at that point. I'm not suggesting that people who have power should be able to use that power to satisfy themselves. What I'm saying is, I find the one to be problematic, but the sex with a 14 or 16-year-old girl by a 50-year-old man to be abhorrent, because she's not able to make a full adult decision. If we take out the Christian component of our laws and our morality, then it is continually being rewritten, and we see how dark things are within our land. I was looking at a study today. Suicide rate is 5 times greater among non-Christians than Christians. It is because we have hope within us. Because we don't have to find the means of our meaning. If people are looking for the meaning of life anywhere other than Jesus Christ, they will not find it, even if they think they do. And we as Christians need to recognize that we have this wonderful gift to give to the proclamation of the gospel is not about emptying out the future cells in hell. I'm not saying there's not cells in hell. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying it's about bringing people hope in the present that will never depart. I can't separate our eternal life from our life in the present, because I think they go together. And I think sometimes we say, okay, we've taken care of the consequences, so now I can do as I please. That's bad theology. Anybody know the name of that? Antinomianism. And antinomianism says that we only are saved by grace. They got that right. But then goes on to say, so it doesn't matter what we do now. They've got that wrong. It is, we come to Jesus Christ, and He takes our sins off our back, as well as taking off the penalty of our sins. Well, if we come to Him, I'm implying that we're repenting. We're turning to Jesus. Because I can't remember the story. Oh man, such a wonderful story, and I can't even remember who wrote it. But the idea is, the guy has got his hands full. And now he has the opportunity to be saved. I don't remember if it was a life buoy or whatever it was. Drop it. And he wouldn't drop it and take hold of life. And so he died because he wouldn't hang on to that which was going to be worthless in 30 seconds anyway. And that's exactly the dilemma that human beings have. Apart from Christ, we can find nothing meaningful. We keep chasing it. Instead of Have you ever thought about how the world mimics the church? Poorly, but I mean, so people try to find community. Where do people try to find community outside when they don't have Jesus? I'm asking for your responses. Okay, in common interest? So let me give some suggestions. The perfect example of a world that wants to have the church but doesn't is Cheers. Anybody old enough to remember Cheers? It took place in Boston. Cheers, TV show Cheers, where everybody knows your name, and that really that phrase from the opening song tells you everything. It's a place where you can go and people will know you, especially if your name's Norm. They'll shout it out every time you walk in the room. Club scenes are built more than just around alcohol. They're built about finding some sort of community when there isn't one. I don't think it's a coincidence that so many nightclubs are the first ones to bid for old church buildings that have been closed. And in fact, you will find the altar area where the bar actually is. Strip joints are the same way, but you're getting into other factors there. Here's the thing. The devil always is a mimicker of God. He's not original. He doesn't create anything. He distorts everything. He's the father of lies. And so people are looking for these things, and what does he give them? Well, fool's gold. Right? Anybody know what fool's gold is? Pyrite? What's the value of pyrite on the market? Zip. In fact, if you had it in your yard, you would pay somebody to come remove it for you. Right? Actually, yeah, but actually it'd be better than the weeds. But here's the thing. So you see all of these things that mimic Christianity. Marriage, as being redefined, is not just a way of sticking the finger in Christians' eyes. It is actually Satan's lie that they're going to find fulfillment in that kind of marriage. Even if it's polyamorous. That's the term. Polyamorous. This has been long predicted. Back in the 90s, people were saying when this first came on the route, I guess the Supreme Court of Iowa is the one who began the ball rolling as far as actually changing the law. And you had people warning then that the old Mormon way, polygamy, thank you. That polygamy couldn't be kept illegal under the new forms of marriage as it is. And now you're beginning to see the fruit of that. Here's the reality. It's not satisfying. You want to know the downsides of polygamy? All you have to do is look at Leah. And look at what the Scriptures does with in the full telling of that story of Jacob and his 2 wives and 2 concubines. His senior wife, because he married her first, even though thought he was marrying Rachel, buys her husband for the night through her sons Mandrake, selling them to Rachel. Now, you can say a lot of things about that passage, but the words that should never come out of your mouth is, what a wonderful model of a Christian marriage. In fact, I've done quite a bit of counseling based on that kind of model of marriage in which there was constant bargaining in the marriage bed. It's a tragedy, because then you have to re-instill trust and relationship when it's become all about pleasure or gain. This is really bringing me back to the passage. The thing that I think Solomon is bringing up, this is what happens in a non-Christian relationships. There tends to be this kind of power plays, bargaining, what's in it for me. That transactional, you know what the word transactional means? Transactional is like you buy and sell something. So I give you this money, you give me this product. Well, marriage is not about a transactional, it's about a covenant relationship which says we are committed one to the other, and what we do as a gift given to one another out of a relationship with one another, out of love for one another, and we don't sit back and go, you owe me 3.2 hours, or whatever else it is we're bargaining for. In fact, that's why communication is so important in a covenant relationship. It's everywhere it is important, but even in Christian marriage that's based on covenant, is because how can you act loving towards a person when you have no idea what it is that you really need to be giving them, right? What is it they value most in the relationship? And are you concentrating on those things? Because, this is human wisdom, but sometimes human wisdom gets it right. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. We think differently. Now, you can call that politically incorrect, but this is called reality, okay? And anybody who thinks that they can really tell you as a woman how a man thinks, or a woman who thinks she knows how, a man doesn't know how a woman thinks. A woman doesn't know exactly how a man thinks. That's why communication is so important. We live in a fallen world in which we easily can divide ourselves, and communication is always bringing us back to what's at the core, at central. I had every intent to get all the way through 8, and part of it was trying to talk around that not everyone was a woman, but that's the point. Is this battle of the sexes is actually a concentration on human things. And if we can glean that from what Solomon is saying, then we get it right. It is not a great place for proof texting when you're talking with your wife. See? No, what your husband is more likely to say, if your husband was ever to, be a smart guy, and of course yours isn't. I meant a wise guy. But what he's but what you get is, if you try to proof text it, is what? If a man tries to proof text, it means, see, I'm superior to you. And if he really came across that way, I'd say so. But Solomon's the same. Look, Solomon finds that most of his problems comes from the decisions he's made about women. And it's not a covenant relationship. How do we know that it's not a proper covenant relationship? Because Jesus says, for this reason a man shall leave his family and be devoted to his wife. It is a union between two people. Solomon chooses to take on not only all his wives, but his concubines. Why? Because he sees his wives as a means of personal pleasure rather than of a deep, caring relationship. He was given wisdom, but just because someone has wisdom doesn't mean they exercise it. People have wisdom to know what they should be doing and still pursue a different path. So here's the question. I'm not trying to be harsh. I just want to. So is it better to have multiple wives out of lust, or for political reasons? Okay. 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 Yeah. But yeah. Yeah. What I would suggest is, yes, there were political influences as well. So lust was one reason he had so many wives. Political reasons was another reason, and none of them were good reasons. No, I didn't think you were, but yeah. Look, it's easy. We'll close on this because I think it's important. Since we're talking about marriage, it is easy for us to view a healthy marriage as they've stayed together and there hasn't been adultery in the relationship. And let me say that it is not enough to people say if their marriage is really shaky. It is not enough for them to say, as bad as this is, I'm not going to have a divorce. I think that's a statement that at some point needs to be resolved, but it's not good enough that you stay in a bad marriage and say, look at me, I've been willing to be the good Christian martyr. What I suggest that people who have marriages that are struggling in covenant, fix it. It's not enough to remain in a bad marriage. We should be ready. I mean, it takes two. But we should be ready to make it everything it was meant to be. And so I really get kind of angry when people have been advised, well, just suck it up and stick it out. It's not bad advice unless it stands alone. Marriage was never intended to be that. Every marriage has moments when it seems like that. But marriage is rather the covenant, not only that we're going to make it through better and worse, but when things are worse, we're going to work for the better. And every great marriage I know of has had to